Okay, thanks for coming to the preliminary draft of my talk. As you see, my actual talk will be on Friday at 3:30. I'm going to be talking about fear generalization, a conceptual framework and impacts on behavior in human-altered environments. So picture you're this guy. You are a squirrel, and you are seeing many of your familiar dangers. Also seeing a lot of these guys, possibly innocuous, but in some cases dangerous. And then there are lots of these, potentially very dangerous. And some of this that comes occasionally, quite rarely, but looks pretty scary. So you live in a world of fear. If you are under afraid, death may be upon you. Whereas if you're over afraid, you will miss out on opportunities while you're avoiding things. And in the modern world, with lots of things all around you that are new and dangerous, you might have nowhere to go. Our general framework for understanding behavior of animals is to say their evolutionary history has shaped previously adaptive cue response systems that then help us to understand the current behavioral responses to humans and other novel situations. So why should animals be either under or over afraid? And we've been using signal detection as a framework, where the general idea is even before you detect a signal, animals have a prior level of fear based on their evolutionary experiential history with, how strong has predation risk been in the past. Then they detect a stimulus and they might flee if its strength, if its scariness basically is above some threshold, or if you have a higher threshold, that's saying that you are bolder, harder to make you scared. Why should you avoid situations that are not actually dangerous? Well, here it's because you have poor information, where it's hard to distinguish what's dangerous and what's not, so you make errors. And if the cost of under-avoiding means you get killed is much greater than the cost of over-avoiding, you will tend to over-avoid situations that are not actually dangerous. But why should you under-avoid some situations that are dangerous? Again, poor information, lack of recognition of the level of danger, and maybe some role of where the cost of over-avoiding is very high, like you're very hungry. We've used this framework in a series of papers cited below, and others have also noted the possibility that this framework is useful. Now, this all sounds like it has something to do with animal personality, where more bold or more shy individuals are more likely to either be under or over afraid. But if you look at the literature, you find that most studies on animal personality assay boldness of individuals in only one situation, most commonly using latency to emerge from refuge. And here I've actually drawn a picture from a paper that was actually not from my lab, but where we picture that often the animals starting out in zone A there, the little door D opens, and boldness is, do they quickly come out of refuge? But few studies, interestingly enough, have examined boldness and quantified it the same individuals repeatedly across multiple situations. But of course, we know that our squirrel is in fact seeing multiple situations that it might be afraid of. So the topic then is fear generalization. If an individual is afraid of X, is it also afraid of Y or Z? If it's afraid of predator X, is it also afraid of novel predator Y or Z? And in fact, there's a good sized literature on that in the invasion ecology field. But if they're afraid of predator X, say more than others are they also afraid of humans more? And vice versa. Are they afraid of cars more than others? Are they afraid of parasites or pathogens? Are people who are afraid of COVID actually also more afraid of various other things that could be scary? Are these even more afraid of abiotic stressors like novel chemicals or pollutants? And basically, we don't know because we've had rather few studies to look at how fear generalizes across situations. We've been really interested in whether or not fear even generalizes to fire, where we've been interested in the fact that there are surprisingly few published studies on behavioral responses to approaching fire, on fear of fire. What cues do animals use to be afraid of fire? Are they afraid of the smoke? Are they afraid of acoustic or visual cues of fire? Do they respond to fire like they respond to predation risk? When they detect smoke, do they go under a bush as they would with predators, or climb a tree, some of which might actually be inappropriate responses to fire? And is the fear of fire correlated to the fear of predators in their environment? Looking across species, populations, or individuals. And Ninmo had a paper that covered some of these topics, but a paper out of my group here with Alice Michelle as the lead that's soon to be submitted focuses in fact on the fear generalization issue. Is there within individual plasticity in this generalized fear? If an individual has had an earlier or recent exposure to a predator that makes it more afraid of that situation, does that increase their fear of other situations? Does it increase, how broad is the range of increased generalized fear when they have a nasty experience, say, with a predator? And this is the topic of PTSD, where people have had some sort of very scary experience where they tend to overgeneralize to many other situations. And there's a fair literature there that, in fact, we can learn from, and vice versa. But why should you generalize across situations? How much do we categorize? And it's a topic that has been of interest in the world connecting cognition to conservation. That fear of X includes fear of everything in category X, but how broad should that category be? So if an animal puts all humans into one category of humans, then they will almost certainly over-avoid some humans who are actually safe. But if they distinguish humans into several different categories, some safe, some dangerous, they're at the risk of under-avoiding some dangerous individuals they've put into the wrong category. And here I also show pictures of this fascinating situation where elephants have been found to distinguish these tribes, one of which kills elephants and the other one does not, and also distinguishes humans by sex and age and so on, apparently by the sight, by the clothes they're wearing, by their smell, by their voices, by the language of what they speak. But what's the optimal degree of categorizing versus generalizing? Well, you should have, if there's a high benefit of responding differentially to different groups, then in fact you should distinguish more categories. But in fact, you should only do that if in fact you can do it well, if in fact you have reliable, good cues that accurately distinguish among groups, and in fact if the cost asymmetry fits, if the cost of having too many categories is less than the cost of having too few categories. A key here is the speed accuracy trade-off, where having a slow, careful assessment of situations may allow you more accurate responses, putting individuals into the correct category of safe or dangerous. But if there's a high cost of assessment in time, attention, energy, and we think in particular risk, if you might get killed while you're just figuring out what's right and what's wrong here, that can favor generalizing, having fewer categories. One major category of interest here in the modern world is things that you can't put in a clear category because they appear novel. You don't know what to make of them, and this is the issue of neophobia. Why should individuals be neophobic? Well, clearly you should be, or part of the story is if you've got a history of novel situations tend to be dangerous as opposed to valuable. But one should be careful to note that there are various types of objects that you could be neophobia to. There are novel objects, there's novel space in general, there's novel foods, novel dangers. And our question again is, how broad is this neophobia? How generalized is your neophobia? What are the correlations across types of neophobia? Are they generally correlated? And is there this generalized neophobia? And there's actually mixed evidence on that, where in fact there's evidence of object neophobia not being correlated to alarm cue neophobia. Same questions exist for neophilia. And in fact, we here in this talk have the interest in whether generalized neophobia correlates to generalized fear. An important topic then is learning and habituation. If a situation is not dangerous, you should learn to ignore it or learn to even approach it because you want to reduce that over-avoidance of things that are not dangerous. And there's a growing literature on how does habituation work. But of course, if you're too habituated to humans, that's when you'll end up with human-wildlife conflict. Situations like this, with these cute bears getting a little too familiar with humans, or this, where I took this picture at a tourist site in China, monkeys getting a little too habituated to humans. So our question is to explain variation in habituation to humans and human situations. And in particular, I'm interested in why do some animals not habituate to humans when humans are in fact safe. And here we're talking about constraints on learning. Why do animals not learn that humans are safe? And one possibility is the past history of danger is so high that the prior general fear is so high that they don't habituate well, even though things are safe. But in fact, more interesting might be where either the past or recently situations have low Q reliability. So even though you've had some experiences where humans appear to be safe, you have evolved in a world where this Q is unreliable, not to be trusted, so you don't adjust. And in particular, we've been really interested in the possibility that some animals avoid humans so strongly that they don't even get the experience that humans are safe. So if you don't allow humans to get close to you, then you'll never learn that if they got close to you, they are not dangerous. You won't learn that because you never allow them to even get close enough to you to find out that they don't attack you. And of course, we're interested then in generalized habituation, the flip side of generalized fear. We note first that habituation typically requires safety generalizing, that animals do not usually see exactly the same humans over and over, or many animals do not. So to habituate to humans, they have to actually categorize humans as a general category and decide humans in general are safe, and I habituate to them. But do we have a generalized habituation? If animals are habituating to X like humans, does that reduce their fear of other things, of Y and Z? So if you habituate to humans, do you have reduced fear of real predators, which would be possibly a real problem? And that has a growing literature that I cite some of the papers on. But what we don't know as much about and have not tested as much is if you habituate to humans, does that reduce your fear of other dangers besides other predators, like even cars or parasites, or for that matter, fire? So to finish up, what we basically ended up saying is there are many generalization issues that we don't know enough about where there are suggested experiments. For fear generalization, how broad is fear? That surprisingly enough, we have not much information on testing individuals on a range of different risks and stressors to see how much are they correlated and carrying over. And if we expose individuals to one risk that should make them more fearful of that, how much does it increase their fear apparently of other risks and other stressors? Neophobia generalization, studying the correlations in response to a range of different kinds of novelty, novel objects, novel foods, novel dangers. Are these correlated? And are they correlated to that, for that matter, to general, or is it specific fears of familiar things? And then finally, habituation generalization. If individuals have habituated to some things like humans, does that reduce their fear of which other risks and stressors, familiar or not? So what I've ended up is not showing you any of the data we're starting to get on this, but really just suggesting an entire field that we think requires more study. I'm very excited to get your comments and ideas, even before I give my final talk on this. And so I invite you to get in touch, and there's my email address. And thanks again for listening.